The subcommittee will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We're a government of, by, and for the American people. This means that the American people can, through their elected representatives, set whatever policies, including immigration policy, they see fit. The law can allow for unlimited immigration, limited immigration, or even zero immigration. But when the government fails to enforce whatever laws happen to be on the books, it undermines our ability to govern ourselves. Likewise, when the President issued his executive edict granting 5 million work permits and Social Security numbers for individuals illegally present in our country, which, by the way, will also make these individuals eligible for taxpayer-financed welfare payments, he harmed the American people's ability to govern themselves. After all, the American people never voted for such a policy. Indeed, the stinging rebuke delivered to the President's party in November, if anything, provided evidence that the public rejected what the President had long been threatening to do. Under the President's policy, U.S. workers will face a $3,000 hiring disadvantage due to the Affordable Care Act. The American people had no say in enacting such a policy. Legal immigrants will see the hefty application fees they must pay to be diverted to administer the President's unconstitutional program, which will make these legal immigrants wait longer. The American people never approved such unfairness. Taxpayers will be on the hook to pay, as Commissioner John Koskinen said just yesterday, retroactive tax credit payments to people who were working in our country illegally for years. The American taxpayer was never given a voice about this. And so the President's policy undermines our basic ability to govern ourselves. And the reason we're having this hearing today is to showcase an even more significant, perhaps, ramification of what the President has done, a ramification that could undermine the integrity of our elections. Through the President's executive actions, millions of non-citizens will be able to obtain valid Social Security numbers and state driver's license. Under Federal law, any person with a valid Social Security number or driver's license can register to vote as long as he attests to his eligibility to do so. Therefore, the President's executive actions dramatically increase the risk that non-citizens may illegally register to vote. Now, the problem of non-citizen voting already exists. Some experts have found that thousands of non-citizens may be registered to vote in some states and perhaps as many as tens of thousands nationwide. A study that was released last year found that some non-citizens do participate in U.S. elections and that this participation has already had a meaningful effect in election outcomes, including electoral college votes and congressional elections. The President's executive actions make this problem of non-citizen voting worse without offering any solutions or assistance to the states. Non-citizen voting undermines voter confidence and damages the integrity of Federal elections. And make no mistake, as an elected official, I don't want my vote totals diminished because of a non-citizen to vote, but I also don't want them to be enhanced either. I want the actual voice of the American people to carry the day. Today we'll hear from Secretaries of State, officials tasked with the responsibility of administering elections in their states. They will testify how the President's executive actions will affect their voter registration rolls and their elections in their states. In fact, one of our witnesses today, Ohio Secretary of State John Husted, wrote to President Obama about this very issue. He requested his administration to, quote, work with us to minimize the impact on the integrity of our elections and to ensure only eligible voters participate in state and Federal elections. We'll also hear from an expert on voter fraud and voting rights laws issues to help us understand the consequences of the President's executive actions. Today's hearing is about upholding the integrity of our elections and ensuring that every American's vote counts. This is the first hearing that we've had on the Subcommittee on National Security, but it is a joint hearing with my friend Jim Jordan. But I did want to recognize the ranking member on our National Security Subcommittee, Stephen Lynch, from the frozen tundra of Boston. And I'm happy to work with you, Stephen, although I am jealous coming from Boston. You guys 4 Super Bowls in the last 15 years, 3 World Series. We don't get that much love in Florida. And so with that, I'll recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Well, I appreciate the congratulations and the condolences for the weather. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you, and I also want to thank our panel of witnesses that have come forward to help the committee with its work. While I do share President Obama's frustration with the inability of Congress to produce a balanced and sustainable immigration policy, I do have some lingering concerns about the precedent set by the President's executive actions on immigration, especially when it comes to other major issues that a future Congress may struggle to address. That is why I continue to welcome the opportunity as a direct representative of my constituents to consider and debate our nation's immigration policy on its merits. Regrettably, the looming February 27 deadline to avoid a shutdown of the entire Department of Homeland Security demonstrates that some members of Congress have chosen a more drastic route in response to the President's executive action. In particular, Republican leadership is attempting, I think, to condition our nation's continued anti-terrorism, border enforcement, and cybersecurity funding on reversing the President's immigration orders. I'm not sure, but is a partial government shutdown and furloughing of approximately 30,000 dedicated Homeland Security employees an appropriate response to the President's executive orders? I'm not so sure that it is. Similarly, today's hearing now attempts to tie the debate over the President's executive action to a different and unrelated issue, I think, the misguided, at times, premise that the President's immigration orders pose a threat of voter fraud by non-citizens who will somehow hijack the election process and thereby threaten our national security. The rights of citizens in this country to vote is one of the most basic tenets of who we are as a people, and it's a cornerstone of our democratic system that must be protected. However, the threat we are here to discuss today is virtually non-existent if you look at the legal and electoral evidence. Non-citizen voter fraud is not, in fact, an active or present threat to our national security, nor do the President's executive actions on immigration launch voter fraud into the realm of a clear and present danger or national security concern. The truth is the President's actions leave State and Federal voting requirements untouched. I want to repeat that. The President's actions leave State and Federal voting requirements untouched. They do not change Federal elections law, and they leave State elections laws unaltered. Nevertheless, it appears that we are here today to discuss voter fraud, especially by non-citizens present in the country. I understand some of our witnesses have expressed concerns to the contrary. However, it simply does not seem plausible that immigrants who apply for deferred action will then choose to ignore Federal and State laws promptly displayed on voter registration forms and then fraudulently attest to being a U.S. citizen just so they can illegally register to vote. When you look at the penalties that would be on an individual in that case that might have received a deferred status and is allowed to come into the country, that they would risk all of that to vote in an election where only 30 or 40% of our own citizens, without penalty, choose to vote in those elections. It just strains the realm of credibility. Further, this argument presumes that these people will then fraudulently vote en masse in order to affect the outcomes of elections in swing states, even though this means that under the immigration law they will be deemed ineligible for admission to the U.S. or other immigration benefit, the very kind of benefits these people are seeking in the first place. To fraudulently vote, non-citizens would have to ignore every real consequence of voter fraud, such as being deported if discovered, and yet some of my colleagues claim that we should be worried about a flood of these instances. I looked at the numbers thinking that perhaps despite all the protections in place, this is a widespread problem. But studies and investigations have shown that non-citizen voter fraud makes up 0.00003%, the tiniest percentage of votes cast in this country. Just to cite a few examples, only 17 instances of non-citizen voter fraud, again 0.0003% of the total votes cast, were found through Ohio Secretary of State John Huston's own investigation, and he is here to testify today, of the 2012 general elections. Additionally, in a State legislative hearing on the issue in Kansas last year, Secretary of State Kobach, again a guest of us this morning, could only cite 20 non-citizen registrants in the whole state. And out of the 20 non-citizens who were registered, only 5 actually voted. So they're having the same problem with non-citizens voting as we are with citizens actually coming to vote. So again, I'm disappointed that we're here today spending our valuable time and resources on unfounded concerns, because there are some real concerns out there. I realize that the President's executive orders have spurred extremely polarizing conversations in Congress, but as a ranking member of the National Security Subcommittee, I hope I can work with you, Mr. Chairman, to refocus on our efforts on some of the very real issues that we face moving forward. Again, I want to thank the panelists for taking the time from their important responsibilities to testify today, and I especially look forward to hearing more about what we are doing to protect the rights of eligible voters in our states and getting the 60 to 70% of voters who are legal citizens of this country but who don't choose to vote. Thank you, and I yield back.
The vote clock, it looks like we got about 4 minutes left on the vote tally. I'd wanted to get Mr. Jordan's opening statement, but I think it would be prudent just to recess the hearing now. When we return, Mr. Jordan will give his statement, Ms. Norton will give hers, the witnesses will give theirs, and then the members will be able to ask some questions. So we stand adjourned until the we stand in recess until the conclusion of this first vote series.